Good afternoon. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. My name is Sarah Kennel. I'm the Siskind Curator of Photography and Director of the Raysor Center here at VMFA. And I am so pleased to welcome you to today's community conversation, Making the Ground Speak, Documenting Black Cemeteries with Brian Palmer. Before we begin, I just want to remind you to silence your cell phones. And also, I just want to express my gratitude to our event techs and our education staff who work nights and weekends for all these programs. So I can tell that Brian already has a fan club in the audience. But for those of you who haven't yet had the pleasure to get to know Brian, he is a journalist, artist, educator, and community leader. Brian was born in New York. He's a New Yorker, received his undergraduate degree from Brown University and his MFA in photography from the School of Visual Arts in New York. He launched into a career as, I would say, globe-trotting photojournalist, working all around the world on national and international stories for publications like The Nation and the New York Times and U.S. News and World Report and CNN, and the list goes on. And of course, he's also worked for the Richmond Free Press. He's also an educator. He's taught journalism at Hampton, NYU, Columbia School of Journalism, and currently is teaching at the University of Richmond. And for at least the past decade, a few years more than that, Brian has also been engaged on what will be the subject of our conversation today, a major documentary project recording the transformation and reclamation of two of Richmond's Black cemeteries, East End and Evergreen, a project that entails both the physical transformation of these sacred spaces, but also community research on the individuals and families interred there, honoring them with not only reviving the grave markers and the names, but also telling their stories, which are Richmond stories, which are Southern stories, and which are American stories. Some of the photographs that we will be seeing on the screen today and that Brian has been making as part of this long project are on view currently in our third floor photography gallery in the exhibition Homegrown, photographs by Susan Worsham and Brian Palmer. So if you haven't had a chance to see it yet, please pop up there after this talk. And if you have, you might want to go back and look again with the increased knowledge that we are certainly going to have after this talk today. And we're going to chat for about 45 minutes, and then we would like to open to questions from all of you. Okay, so I'm going to begin, maybe not put the picture up yet.
Yes, Sarah, could I do one thing?
Of course.
I would, first of all, thank you all for coming. There are a lot of familiar faces in the audience. I would like to thank the VMFA, Sarah and Valerie and Sarah E. and Michael for putting me up on the walls, but my wife, Erin Holloway Palmer, couldn't be here today. She's actually traveling, so she's, I hope, tuning in electronically. But I would not be on this stage, I would not be in Virginia were it not for her. She was the one who suggested, after I took my pictures, that we put our hands in the dirt. She did that, and then we stayed for a decade plus. And then the Friends of East End. I see some wonderful people here. I see Mark, I see Bruce. I know Justin and Melissa and Maurice have tuned in or turned up. And Jareen Fleming, wonderful descendant who's worked with us. They are what they have kept me here, engaged in this work. And as Sarah is saying, the physical reclamation we're proud of. That's the extreme gardening we do to reclaim the cemeteries from nature and neglect. But it's the historical reclamation. It's the reclamation of the stories of ancestors, relatives, people buried there That's what makes that physical reclamation meaningful. The sites will fall back into disrepair if we don't care about the people who are laid to rest there. So I just wanted to say that. And Bruce. Sorry, I think Bruce and Eileen, who are probably moving to the back to be with Mark and Karen, and here comes Taft Kaiser and Laura Kaiser, archaeologists who have helped us out at the cemetery.
So I wanted to kind of back up a little bit, Brian, because as I mentioned in the introduction, you're a New Yorker, or as you like to say, New Yorker.
Yeah, I'm a New Yorker, yeah.
And you studied, you specialized in East Asian studies as an undergraduate.
Yeah,
actually,
I did.
China, maybe a China specialist, which makes perfect sense for your globe trotting, running around the world, documenting, important events. So how did you end up in Richmond? I mean, we're eternally grateful that you did, but I think that story and telling that story as a kind of origin point for your engagement is really interesting, fascinating.
I think that's a pretty fabulous place to start. Some folks may know this story, but most probably don't. As a baby journalist, I thought meaning was elsewhere. So in China and Burma and various places, I had absorbed some of my parents' frustration, anger with racialized situation here, Jim Crow. Dad was born in 1928, so a child of here in York County, Virginia, a child of Jim Crow, served in the military as it was attempting to desegregate. My mother was born in Queens, New York, and when she tried to get a job as a speech therapist, she had 2 master's degrees. In New York, she could not get an interview, and people were pretty candid. You're black. This is 1956. So that craziness about America, I think, really drove me first to China and to other places. Then my dad died in 2011. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that happened in between, but we can even maybe drive our way to. So my dad is second from the left. This is a picture that Aaron actually found among his belongings after he passed away in 2011. Those are 9 senior African Americans. Dad, one of the few, was not smiling. I recognized the gravestone, the name Matthew Palmer is probably not too clear. My great-grandfather. I did not know much about him. No one in my family did. But I did know where they were. They were at Camp Perry. Who in the audience knows what Camp Perry is? Someone say what Camp Perry is. Yeah, so top secret Department of Defense installation. It's the home of the farm, the CIA. When I got permission to visit, I asked the public affairs officer who was leading us around, said, so what's this about this CIA being here? And he looked at his feet and smiled, and he said, you mean the Culinary Institute of America? I bet he used that one a lot. But I wanted to go not because I gave a damn about history, but because I wanted bragging rights with my fellow journalists. I had covered the military a lot for US News. Cheryl magazine knows that. I had crossed paths with special operators and CIA people while embedded with Marines in Iraq. So I wanted the bragging rights, and then I did the research. We were doing the research, Aaron and I, learning that my great-grandfather and great-grandmother, this is a long process of education, but both of them had escaped from enslavement here in Virginia. Matt Palmer from Goochland County, Julia Fox Palmer from Gloucester County. They had liberated, emancipated themselves before the end of the Civil War, along with 500,000 other people. I was 49 years old when I learned all this American history and personal history. 250,000 women, men, children aided the US war effort against the Confederacy, against slavery. So they emancipated themselves, and then they emancipated this country, which is pretty wild to think about. Then you had the folks like Matt Palmer, my great-grandfather, who fought in in the United States colored troops, the segregated arm of the United States Army. It was pretty powerful stuff. So this, I was gonna come down here and make a documentary, go back to New York, and everything would be great. I'd do the film festival circuit. But that history kept me here. I did not know that history. I knew pieces of it. And that connected me to these places. So that was Matt Palmer's headstone. I'm talking a lot, and Sarah isn't getting to talk.
This is great.
Yeah.
Works well for both of us.
Matt Palmer on the left, that photograph was hanging on the wall of Mount Pilgrim Baptist Church. A relative that we'd met in 2012 said, yeah, we got a picture of Matt Palmer. It's hanging on the Palmer Family Church wall. I'm like, no, it isn't. The Palmer Family Church is Mount Gilead. Well, there's a different branch of the Palmers right near Camp Perry, or what used to be their land. Matt Palmer is at Mount Pilgrim. So Aaron and I started on this journey to try and find the stories of Matt and Julia. This is Snowdon, where Matt's last owner lived. Has anyone done genealogy in this room? So when you do genealogy, sometimes you find some interesting documents like a union pension application. That's how we confirmed that Matt Palmer served in the USCT. There's a question on the last page. He had a very thin union pension application, but on the last page, the question was, have you been a slave? Were you a slave? He answered yes. He couldn't write, someone must have written it for him. And then it asked, who was your last owner? And we were very lucky it wasn't John Smith. It was Mabon Hobson. Not a very common name. That's where Mabon lived. That was his home. So, Sarah, I'm going to put that there. So that's the story. We were documenting Camp Perry, and then at a certain point we were shut out. So we decided that we wanted to look at other historic African-American cemeteries. And when we did, they turned out to be more than just surrogates. We realized that they were, Lynn Rainville calls, the historian Lynn Rainville calls them outdoor museums. I like outdoor archives of the African-American experience. They're also sacred grounds. But we were finding these connections, not always to the Palmers, but often to this community that was displaced in order to create Camp Perry, called Magruder. And Aaron, as I said, was the one who said, well, yeah, so we're doing this documentation with our head. Why don't we do some reclamation with our hands? And that's how we wound up at these cemeteries in Richmond. A couple of friends, Shannon Castleman and Pat Story, told us about these sprawling, neglected African-American cemeteries. And we thought, we've seen some neglected cemeteries. We had never seen anything like Evergreen and East End, 76 acres at the time, this would have been 2013, of essentially rainforest.
So yeah, can you tell us a little bit about what Evergreen and East End were like when you first got there? And I think one of the questions that you struggled with when you first got there was kind of, why are they so neglected? What has happened to the communities that that built these cemeteries? So
I know for a fact that many of the people in this audience have been to East End and Evergreen, and folks watching have been there as well. So when we first arrived, our first visit was in 2014. Aaron was driving in, and there was a wall of green on our right-hand side. So as you drive in the access road, Evergreen Road, I didn't see cemetery. Erin has eyes of a raven, so she was catching little edges of headstones and stuff that I didn't see. We assumed that that was just a piece of Evergreen. It's actually a separate cemetery called East End, but we drove in to Evergreen, and the center area was mostly clear, but the rest of the cemetery was wicked overgrown, super, super overgrown. Sarah referred to the feeling that I had at the beginning. I knew where Maggie Walker was buried. I had a vague idea who she was. So there was definitely a sense that this is an important place. But what really hammered me was a sense of tragedy. I kept thinking, Jim Crow worked. You look at these sites, Jim Crow worked. Now I realize Jim Crow did work in many ways. Jim Crow didn't win, but the site there was structural neglect. I remember afternoon, it was the afternoon that I met Jareen, or sometime around there. White guy driving a car just kind of stopped, and it was one of our early work days, and he looked at, he was talking out the passenger window, and he said, just a shame these people can't take care of their places. And I thought, wow, and like then, I knew that there was clearly something wrong with that. The implication being that, the relatives of those people buried there did not take care of their loved ones. Of course, no accounting at all for the structural racism, Jim Crow, that created the circumstances that effectively decimated African American communities, right? Drove some people to the north, drove some people west. Then Jim Crow policies again, white elite men directing public resources, tax money to Confederate cemeteries, millions of dollars over a century. I knew all of that, and still the physical state of the cemeteries just hurt sometimes. You remember the Navy had this, this tagline, it's not a job, it's an adventure. Going out to the cemetery, it's not a job, although we're there almost every day. It's an encounter, and every day I encounter both the tragedy of these sites, but also the power and the love. So what worked, Sarah, was watching Erin working myself. In my head, I knew, we're doing the right thing. We're virtuous. We're just such. So I dug, I pulled vines. Y'all probably relate to that. And about a year and a half in, we were wrenching vines over at East End, and it was summer, and the sweat and the insect repellent were dripping in our eyes, and Erin found a headstone. I don't remember exactly who it was, but she greeted that person. Erin greets a stone, the person whose name is inscribed in the stone, when she reveals it from vines and dirt and stuff like that. And, I kind of thought that was corny until then. And I didn't think, actually. It was this visceral thing. We are reclaiming history, the past, one headstone at a time, and we're doing it as a community. And that was what grounded me in that work. And my work actually started to change, and that's something I think we can talk about.
Yeah. I'd love to talk about how as a photographer, your work shifted from, I want to say, really, at some level, there was part of you that was, it sounds like, still thought of this as a project. This is a story I'm telling for an audience, something you have been trained to do, to actually realizing that you are part of this story and that it's much bigger than one story, it's many stories. Where was that kind of shift, and how do you feel like it's changed the way that you approach photography?
It's changed everything. So you landed on that photograph. I was photographing in that original mindset, that tragedy mindset. I was collecting evidence of the damage. I tell my students, my photo students, you need to see the light, you have to be patient. I was like, oh yeah, evidence. It was, and that's not a bad picture, but that anger was what was both animating me and kind of shutting me down. And I slowed down eventually, watching Erin doing this work, getting into the rhythm with our friends of East End. And what I tell folks is I slowed down enough to begin not begin, but to really read the inscriptions, right? The inscriptions, they're carved with love and respect. They tell you stories. Each is a unique text, some with more information than others, but you begin to realize, oh, right, this is a community. Cedar Street Baptist Church, Moore Street, 6 Mount Zion, First African Baptist, Fifth Baptist, all the mutual aid societies, Independent Order of St. Luke. Marvelous. It was absolutely marvelous. And it was that slowing down and that connecting with the power of these places. I mean, like we all know, oh, Maggie Walker, she's the pride of Richmond. But do we know who Maggie Walker was and why she did what she did? Maggie Walker was not just the first African-American woman to start a bank, the first woman bank president. Her thing was empowering African-American women economically and with skills. Retail store, newspaper, bank, St. Luke's Penny Savings. Ran for political office, but she was all about economic empowerment. John Mitchell Jr., editor of the Richmond Planet, buried at Evergreen. We know he was born property, anti-lynching editor, fighting editor. And the lesser-known people, 2 of my relatives who Aaron found death certificates buried at East End. All of those people are part of what historian Robert Engs called freedom's first generation, meaning that they were the first people, first African Americans to experience briefly freedom that they had won. They weren't given. Gabriel won it for them. Nat Turner won it for them. Harriet won it for them. The USCT won it for them. They were the first people to enjoy that freedom. So the work changed. This is Aaron doing what Aaron does. I don't like garbage, but the cemeteries had been used as dumping sites for ages. So she is our waste management specialist attacking these middens of trash. And I join her, but I mostly take the pictures when she's doing it.
I love, well, you've called this extreme gardening, and you've also said that the ratio of graves that she's cleared to you is like, 100 to 1. But you are taking the pictures, so.
No, it's, she's found somewhere between 1,000 and 2,000. And I've found between 50 and 100. Okay. So yeah, no, she has radar in her feet.
But this is one of the pictures we have up right now in our hallway. And, it's funny, I saw this picture when I came here as a curator a couple of years ago. It was acquired by my colleagues before I came, my colleagues in modern and contemporary art. I love this picture before I even really knew what it was. There is something about, all that green overgrowth, which is kind of just beautiful, even as it's kind of poisonous to the environment. And that was not even before I even knew the story. This is also a large format photograph. So I was really surprised and pleased to get to know you, but also learn that, you have considered yourself more. These are somewhat artificial divisions, but a photojournalist and not a photographic artist. And yet it's clear in this picture and the work that you have been doing during this project that your own sense of photography, I think, has changed. I just would love to hear you more. You've experimented with scale, you've thought about diptychs. If you talk a little bit about also, how this project has changed your own practice.
And you did ask that, and I didn't answer. So there's this image was from 2015, and I made it almost in spite of myself during the damage phase. When I was documenting the damage, I was stopped in my tracks by the beauty. Yes, there's beauty here. That tendril of ivy hanging down. The stone is for Martha Dandridge. So for me, photojournalism, visual journalism, documentary photography exists on this this continuum between the literal and the lyrical. So if something is perfectly literal, it's going to be dull. It's like those evidence pictures. If it's so lyrical that it's just completely expressive, belly button kind of stuff, that's not what I do, because the facts, the circumstances, the people in this place are absolutely important to me. Sometimes I don't show the names on the headstones because that may personalize things too much. Sometimes I do. But this is a scene that I think kind of challenges and balances that tragedy, beauty, promise, all of those things. And I had to make myself continue to photograph more like this. Even, I was out there this morning, I was out at Evergreen yesterday, and I just found myself sometimes slipping into that evidentiary mode. And it's not that healthy, actually. I have to slow down and do what I tell my students. Look for the light. Where's the light coming from? How is it hitting the foliage? How is it hitting the stones? What visual experience are you having? What's going to pull you into the image to make you think, I want to know more about that place. I wonder who that is. I have pictures of Martha Dandridge on the other side. So my work, I think all of my photography has changed through this experience of both being in the dirt and then stepping back and trying to photograph both the transformation and what nature has done and what people intended. They intended their loved ones, their friends, their fellow congregants to be memorialized and honored. So I try and respect that as well.
What I love about this picture, I do love that single tendril kind of that catches the light. The picture is full of metaphors. The kind of delicacy, but also that tendril catches the light. And then you have this dialogue between nature and this implacable, beautiful stone. And stone that really is sort of asserting presence despite change,
Exactly.
despite time.
Exactly.
And as we discussed the other night, this is not a small headstone. This was clearly, somebody put time and effort into creating this. And so it kind of stands for a lot of different stories. And I'm wondering if you can tell us, as you noted, there are some of the famous people like Maggie Walker and Evergreen, but what are some of the other stories that you've surfaced? I mean, how does this project, it's a reclamation and an honoring of the communities interred there, but it's also, your intention is also really to enlarge our understanding of American history.
Oh,
I mean,
absolutely.
if I understand you correctly. So what are some of the other stories that you've learned, that have surfaced?
Well, I think I would first like to say, Sarah, that Martha Dandridge situation with the foliage, that doesn't exist. The Friends of East End cleared that, so you can see Martha Dandridge clearly. She's accessible. That's why we do what we do. So her headstone is accessible. Her family can go there, historians, whomever else. So that's critical. What was the real question, Sarah?
Just sort of the broader question of how can we have a fuller understanding of American history through the stories that you're uncovering. You're uncovering
Right.
the graves, the physical
Right.
graves. And I should say that the work that you are doing as a group with many volunteers, we talked about archival research. The cemeteries are being mapped and scanned.
Yeah.
People are being identified.
Yes.
Death records, other archival documents are scanned. Posting things on Find a Grave, which many people
Yes.
know about. But it's really building a kind of web, figuring out communities, what people did, professions.
And you asked, and now I remember, about people, headstones, grave markers that we found, and what is important about them. So one of the first riveting stone experiences was that of Richard Fillmore Tansel. I photographed this stone twilight in like 2015, just a quick picture. And then 3 days later, it was gone. We checked with family members. They didn't know where it was, so we got the stone replaced. But it was a really kind of a pivotal moment for us because Dr. Tansel, Dr. Richard Fillmore Tansel, was one of those folks who was born property in Fauquier County in the 1850s. After the war, his parents put him in public schools in Northern Virginia. He went to Howard undergraduate, Howard Medical School. Here in Richmond, he was a hospital administrator. He started a bank. He was our gateway in so many ways for people who would come to visit the cemetery. Would say, this is Dr. Tansel, Dr. T. This is a man who his great-grandson's wife, Susan, tells us loved to give candy to the children, even though he was a doctor, wore a shiny gold watch that he'd let the kids play with, was a natty dresser, so it allowed us to connect to a community. This morning, I didn't make any pictures. Sometimes, so what I did this morning is I was walking around and sometimes I pick up trash, not because I'm special, but because I don't like looking at trash. The little pieces, not those giant piles that Aaron attacked. But there was a vase that had cracked with the cold, so I was picking it up and I absentmindedly put my camera bag down and then I walked around. I forgot where I put my camera bag, which is really not bright. But on the way to find it, Kate will know that the city sends a crew out from the cemetery division from Oakwood Cemetery every Sunday. So I had to pretend I knew what was up, like just walking around checking things out. I straighten veterans' flags as well. But I ran into a veteran's grave, Albert A. Smith, Anderson Smith, born in 1920, died 2000, World War II veteran. And I was thinking, so he would have served in the US Army when segregation was still legal, was still the law of the Army. It was before Truman's desegregation order 9981, right? And I thought about what's going on now. And I thought about the firing of the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, C.Q. Brown, called a DEI hire. A man who has 130 combat hours, and Lisa Franchetti, the chief naval officer. And I thought, like, what? So these sites remind us of what folks did and what folks had to overcome. They're not vestiges of the past that we can kind of put behind us. The same processes that were at work back in 1942, 43, 44, 45. They're coming back with wicked force now. And I think that's something the cemeteries can remind us of, not just the tragedy, not just the way that our history is erased and put this way and that way, but how the individuals, the communities, and the movements fought back. You all remember the 1904 streetcar boycott? Maggie Walker had a hand in that. John Mitchell Jr. had a hand in that. That was African Americans organizing against segregation. Did they win? No. But did they help build their community? Yes. Maggie reminds me of that, her plot. She's buried with family. She's buried with staffers. She's buried with her community. Shouldn't that be woven into the fabric of American history? Should it not be wiped out because of executive orders that say these are divisive concepts? What's the divisive concept? Is it slavery, Jim Crow, genocide of indigenous people, Chinese Exclusion Act, Japanese internment camps, denial of the women the right to vote, the right to choose? Aren't those the divisive realities? That history that these cemeteries show us, lead us to. It's reparative. It's us. It's the fabric of the United States. So I feel that, as I said, it's not a job, it's an encounter. Every time I go out to the cemeteries, I see someone like Albert A. Johnson. We pull up headstones like Mr. Carrington as carefully as we can, guided by the guidelines of Virginia Department of Historic Resources and our archaeologist friends, Lizzie Bonds here, Taft Kaiser, showing us the way. It's all of a piece, Sarah. It's all of a piece, and it's transformed me. And Erin thinks this is corny, but I've never felt more American in my life than I do now. That's what kept me in Virginia, not running back to New York for the film festivals. This is real. This matters. This is us. White people, black people, Latino people, Asian people, indigenous folk. Everybody does this work with us because it's ours. It's our history.
Could you tell us a little bit about how the Descendants Council is, you work with them, and for people who may not know their own family history or may have some sense, because this is also not just, you're involved with East End and Evergreen, but this is a story throughout the American South and really throughout the United States. I was just having a conversation with Makeda right before this program started about her own family history, and that, there's a family plot in South Carolina. It's unclear who's going to be able to take care of it now. So how do people get involved? How do the descendants find you? You find them? How do we make these connections? How do we spread the word?
So you mentioned the Descendants Council of Greater Richmond, Virginia. So there's that organization that we started a few years ago, actual entity. But you mentioned there are, and I should have mentioned this before, thousands of these overgrown historic African American cemeteries across the South and across the country, but concentrated in the South. And there's a reason that they're overgrown and less cared about. And there's the legacy of Jim Crow, and then there's what the priorities are now. And I think you don't change those priorities unless you unearth that history. So people can get involved locally by doing a little bit of research. So there are so many of these amazing efforts around the country. Brooklyn Cemetery in Athens, Georgia, Friends of Gear Cemetery in Durham, North Carolina, Preservers of Daughters of Zion in Charlottesville have done an amazing job working with Preservation Virginia and the city of Charlottesville, like one of those rare examples of everybody coming together and honoring this history. They're absolutely amazing, Bernadette and Edwina, super, super amazing. Sometimes there was local news stories about how, plucky volunteers are cleaning up a cemetery. You can find the efforts that way. And you can find us on Instagram, Friends of East End, friendsofeastend@gmail.com. Descendants, volunteers, our friends in city government, city parks and rec. This has been a long, long journey to where we are now, which I think is a much better place, working together to honor this history. And we are going to be swimming upstream, certainly, with these attacks on DEI. The D never really, I think the D is performative. I think the equity and the inclusion part are absolutely American values. And I think we can have equity and we can have inclusion based on substance and content and history. And that's what I would like people to recognize, that the history is all there. The stories of these people, the stories of the communities, the movements that they built. It's amazing. And to harness that in the face of erasure. I'm thinking a lot about erasure. Professor from Yale, Jason Stanley's written a lot about how the elites, this intersection of, it's not just race, I talk a lot about race, but profit-seeking ideology and power, like how the attempt then and now, so maybe from y'all, any history teachers out there? So you know about Reconstruction and then the euphemistically named redemption after that, where white elites were clawing back their power, right? Part of that was to, as Stanley put it, erase their sins from the public record. But there was more than that. It's to erase the individuality, erase the communities, and erase the movements. If you erase those movements, how do we tap into that power? How do we tap into what Maggie Walker built? How do we tap into what John Mitchell Jr. built? How do we tap into all of these movements that people built? We can't. So that's why we have to continue to do it on our own at the individual level. Go to these places, talk to descendants, go to churches, do all this. Take pictures.
So the last question, this is, and I realize I've been ignoring the slides, so I'm just going to play them as we go. So you recently, and you don't know I'm going to ask you this question, you recently published an interview with Fred Richmond in Aperture magazine, which is, the most kind of well-known photography magazine in the United States. It's been published since 1955, I think. And this particular issue was on AI. Your dialogue with Fred was so interesting because it made me think about this particular moment with the challenges of kind of the rise of, AI and distrust of media on the one hand, the threats to the free press, and then this attempt to erase history are all coming together. And so to me, it makes actually photography as a practice of the kind you do both more fraught but also more urgent. And so one of the questions I want to ask you is, as you're engaged with this, and you're clearly engaged on all fronts, you and many other people, of the physical work in the cemetery, the archival work, but I want to know whether you have a sense of how to disseminate this on a broader scale to try to tell the story in a way to transform, to fight against, in fact, this move to erase history and to tamp down on, the press. Have you thought about that? Is it going to be a multimedia project? Is it going to be a big exhibition? Is it going to be a book? Or is it still, we don't know yet?
It's this, first of all, and I thank you for having me here at starting these conversations. It's, if you can go back one, these were young women from an organization called Work of Art, 13 to 18, college preparatory, just doing wonderful community service. And okay, little sexist reveal here. I was thinking they would be like, oh, I don't want to get dirty. They were all up in that dirt, revealing headstones that have not been seen for 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years. So it was a lovely afternoon. Conversations between those folks and us, you, them, this on stage now. Don't get me started on AI. I'll be very, very brief. But so Fred Richmond, who you have mentioned, and Fred is a professor emeritus at International Center for Photography in New York. Fred wrote the book on digital photography. His first book on digital photography is published 40 years ago, quite some time ago. And Fred was saying, we need standards for digital photography. We need standards when you can actually get in at the pixel level and start moving things around. So we're, with generative AI, that is Well, the horse is out of the barn. It's already pate and glue and all those things. But we can still attest to the power, the authority, the veracity of what we do. I am a nonfiction photographer, a photojournalist, and what matters is my encounters with the world. I am there with my camera. Yes, it may have some algorithms and so on and so forth, but I use it in a way that maintains fidelity to the scene, maintains fidelity to Carlton and Liz and Joan and Clay and Cheryl, the people in front of me. That's what matters. I don't use generative AI. That's scraping stuff. Fred and I talk a lot about the images that have changed society, changed hearts, changed minds. Some have been manipulated and changed things the wrong way, but the ones we remember are straight images. I'm going to continue to do that. AI is revolutionary in medicine and various other areas, but it has no place in journalism, at least in the production of work. Our work exists in the flesh and blood world, right? Brick and mortar world. An algorithm or a large language model can't tell me what's happening right now with each one of you. Only I can do that. And yeah, it's going to be subjective. I'm going to photograph from here, maybe from there. But you can come back to me and say, hey, why did you make that choice? And I can tell you. Why did you do that in Photoshop? Well, because I didn't change anything. I just lightened it up or I color corrected. I can tell you exactly what I did because it matters. It's a document in a sense, or as Fred said, quoting John Berger, a quotation from appearances. I'm quoting and I'm not messing with anything inside the quote.
I think, photography has always been a flexible medium that allows for manipulation. But my worry about AI is on a much broader level around, the question of politics, discourse, our understanding of reality and truth.
Yes, and it's terrifying, deep fakes, all that. We can't stop that. But what I can say is these young women were there on that day. You can talk to them, you can talk to me, you can go to that place and see their work in the real world. Is that scalable, as they say? No, but it's real. And we can all create our little models of that. It's essential that we do that. So yeah, the deep fakes, all of that garbage, the disinformation, the misinformation that we're going to be fed, I tell my students, go to a variety of sources. Get the evidence, get as close to the primary documents, talk to humans. The search for truth, it doesn't end. When you're writing a story, that's just what you let go at that moment. It continues, and I think we have to have that mindset as citizens.
On that note, Brian, I would like to thank you, and our audience, thank you.
Thank you.